Tailwind CSS version 4 is here, and this update is a major one. Packed with incredible new features, optimizations and utilities, it's designed to make your development process faster, more efficient and more enjoyable. Today we're diving deep into everything this version has to offer, so stick around for a comprehensive overview of this major update. Welcome back everyone to our YouTube channel Code and Create. If you're new here, I'm George and I run the channel with my friend Lasha. Together we've built this space to share our passion for web development and design. You'll find lessons here that feel like premium content but are completely free to help you learn and grow. Whether you're a beginner or looking to expand your skills, we've got something for everyone. If you enjoy the content we create, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription not only motivates us to keep producing high quality tutorials, but it also helps us reach our goal of hitting 20,000 subscribers this month. Now, let's jump into today's topic and talk about one of the most groundbreaking improvements in Tailwind CSS 4, the new high-performance engine. This version is a complete rewrite of the framework, built from the ground up with speed and efficiency in mind. The results are pretty surprising. Full rebuilds are now over 3.5 times faster, and incremental builds are over 8 times faster. These performance gains mean smoother workflows, faster iterations, and more time spent building great designs instead of waiting for your CSS to compile. Now, before we dive into all the exciting new features and updates in Tailwind CSS version 4, let's take a moment to get our environment ready. The first and most important step is installation and setup. So let's take care of setting up Tailwind CSS in a React project step by step, and once that's done, we will jump right into the features that make this update so powerful and developer friendly. If you ever need a quick reference or want to explore more about Tailwind CSS, I highly recommend checking out the official Tailwind CSS website. It is an incredible resource where you can find detailed installation and setup guides for version 4, along with examples, documentation, and everything you need to master Tailwind. The site is super user-friendly and it makes it easy to follow along whether you're a beginner or an experienced developer. Simply head over to tailwindcss.com and you will have access to all the latest updates and resources at your fingertips. I have a new folder on the desktop called Tailwind CSS version 4. Let's open it in VS Code and then open Terminal by pressing Ctrl plus backtick. You can also open the terminal from View, selecting Terminal. To start, we need to create a new React application using Vite. Vite is a fantastic tool. It is super fast and perfect for modern JavaScript projects. To create the project, we will use the command npm create Vite at latest. Then we need the name of the project. Let's call it My Tailwind Project. Next we need --template and React. So this command does a couple of important things. First, npm create Vite at latest ensures we are using the latest version of Vite. Then we specify My Tailwind Project as the name of our new project folder. And finally, the --template React part tells Vite that we want to set up a React-based project. Next, we are asked to select the library. We need React, and then select JavaScript. Once the setup is complete, you will see the folder of the project. So let's navigate into the project directory using cd My Tailwind Project. Now we are inside the project folder and ready to install Tailwind CSS. Tailwind has really simplified its setup in version 4 by introducing a dedicated plugin for Vite. To install Tailwind CSS and the plugin, run this command npm install Tailwind CSS at Tailwind CSS /Vite. So here is what's happening. Tailwind CSS is the core library that gives us all those utility classes, and at Tailwind CSS /Vite is the official plugin that integrates Tailwind with Vite. Once that's done, it is a good idea to double check your package.json file to confirm that Tailwind CSS 4 version is installed. If you see the correct version there, then we're all set to move on. Next, we need to configure Tailwind CSS in the vit.config.js file. Open this file, and the first thing we will do is import the Tailwind Vit plugin. So we need to add import Tailwind CSS from at Tailwind CSS /vit. Then we will add this plugin to the plugins array, like so. What this does is tell Vit to use the Tailwind plugin as part of its build process. This integration is what ensures Tailwind works fine with our application. Now, let's move on to setting up Tailwind's base styles. Open the src index.css file and clear out everything inside. Then we need to add this at import Tailwind CSS. This single line is incredibly powerful. It imports all of Tailwind's base styles, components, and utilities into our project. With just this, Tailwind is ready to style our application. In the previous versions, we had to import here different Tailwind CSS directives like base, components, and utilities, but now in version 4, we just need this single line of code. Since we are now relying entirely on Tailwind for styling, we no longer need the default app.css file. So let's go ahead and delete it from the src folder and make sure to remove any references to it from your app.jsx file. This keeps our project clean and focused. Now, it's time to test if Tailwind CSS is working. First, let's empty the contents of the app.jsx file so we can start fresh. Then create a new component using the RAFCE shortcut. If you're not familiar with RAFCE, it is a quick snippet that generates a React functional component for you. It is a big time saver, and you can install ES7 React Redux snippets in the extension manager. Now, in this new component, we will style a simple wrapper div. I'll add the following Tailwind utility classes: bgred 500 and p12. I'm in the padding 12. And then I will add here a heading with the classes text 5XL, font bold, text white, and the content is going to be this is Tailwind CSS version 4. What this does is create a bold, white, extra large text inside a red box with some padding. Now that our component is ready, let's run the project to see the results. To start the development server, we need npm run dev. This will generate a local URL, localhost 5173. Let's press Alt or Control and click the link. When you open the browser, you should see a big red box with the bold white text that says this is Tailwind CSS version 4. And that's it. This confirms that Tailwind CSS 4 is installed and working perfectly in our React application. Now that we have Tailwind CSS installed and fully configured in our project, let's move on to one of the most exciting features introduced in version 4, CSS-based configuration. This update completely changes the way we configure Tailwind, shifting from a JavaScript-based configuration file to a pure CSS-based approach. Not only does this make setup more intuitive, but it also gives us more flexibility when working with utility classes. Let's start by exploring one of the core aspects of this update, the theme directive. This feature allows us to define custom theme variables directly inside our CSS, making them instantly available throughout the project. For example, let's say we want to introduce a new color palette and define a custom shade of blue. We can do that with the theme directive. We need add theme, and then we have to define variable deep blue 500, and the color is going to be 023047. So here we are defining a deep blue color and assigning it to a CSS variable named deep blue 500. But defining the variable alone is not enough. We need to tell Tailwind how to use it. To do that, we create a corresponding utility class, bg deep blue, and then we have to define a background color property with variable deep blue 500. Now Tailwind automatically recognizes this class and we can use it just like any other Tailwind utility. Instead of using a predefined Tailwind color like bg red 500, we can apply our custom color like this, bg deep blue. Once we check the browser, we can see the heading now has a background color that matches our custom deep blue 500. The best part, this doesn't require any modifications in a config file, it's all handled directly in CSS. Now that we've successfully added our first custom color, let's take it a step further by introducing more custom theme colors using the theme directive. This allows us to create a fully personalized color palette that matches our design needs without relying solely on Tailwind's default colors. Let's go ahead and define 2 additional colors in our theme section. I'm going to add here amber 500 and the color is going to be FB8500. As for the second color, it's going to be alabaster 500 and we need here E0, E1, DD. Next we need to define utility classes to make these colors usable. I'm going to add here bg amber and the background color is going to be variable amber 500, and after that I'm going to add here text alabaster. In this case we need color with the variable alabaster 500. So this means we can now use bg amber for backgrounds and text alabaster for text colors in our components, just like built-in Tailwind colors. Now let's put these colors into action by creating a custom styled button inside our app.jsx file. I'm going to add to the button the following classes. We need bg amber, then text alabaster, then I'm going to add text 2XL, font bold, margin top 12. Then let's make the button rounded and also create some padding, px6 and py4. As the content, I'm going to add here click here. Now if we check the browser, we can see the button with an amber background and an alabaster color text. Again, no need to mess with JavaScript configuration or CSS files cluttered with repetitive code. Tailwind's theme directive ensures all of this is clean, reusable and consistent across your project. Version 4 of Tailwind CSS introduces the powerful utility directive, which allows you to extend or customize existing utility classes or create entirely new ones directly in your CSS. This is a major improvement over the older layer directive used in previous versions, where customizations were added in the layer utilities block. With utility, the syntax is more streamlined and focused, making it easier to work with and maintain. In previous versions, if you wanted to extend the container utility, you would do it like this, using layer. Now, with the utility directive, the process is more intuitive, and here is how you can customize the container utility in Tailwind CSS 4. We need add utility, followed by the container, and then we have to add here some CSS rules. Let's say padding 20 pixels, max width 1280 pixels, and margin auto. When working with the new utility directive in Tailwind CSS 4, you might notice that for some reason VS Code doesn't provide syntax highlighting for the properties and values inside the utility block. I think it happens because we are working with the new feature. However, the code will still work as expected in the browser and Tailwind will generate the correct utility classes. So, using utility container, we have defined custom padding and a maximum width for the container utility. This also censors the container horizontally by setting margin to auto. The syntax is much cleaner and more direct than the older layer utilities approach, What's great about this is that you can now focus specifically on customizing or extending a utility class without dealing with unnecessary boilerplate. Let's see how this works in our project. I'll replace the outer div's p12 class with the container utility, which is customized. When you check the browser, you will notice that the container utility applies custom padding on the left and right, limits the maximum width to 1280 pixels, and censors the content on the page. The changes we made with utility are immediately reflected, and this approach keeps our project organized and efficient. Tailwind CSS 4 introduces several changes to its default styles, making designs more intuitive and adaptable right out of the box. At first glance, these changes might seem small, but they have a significant impact on how elements behave and how effortlessly they integrate into different layouts. One of the key updates is how borders are handled. In previous versions of Tailwind, borders used a fixed default color, gray 200. While this worked well in many cases, it wasn't particularly flexible. If you wanted your border color to match the surrounding text or inherit styling dynamically, you had to manually specify a color for each instance. With Tailwind CSS 4, this has been completely reworked. Now, borders automatically inherit the current text color by default using current color. This means that the border color will match the color of the text inside the element. Let's see this in action. In our project, we have a custom styled button with a background of amber and text color of alabaster. Now, if we add a border to this button using border 4, something interesting happens. Instead of getting the default gray 200 border from older versions, the border now automatically inherits the text color, which in this case is text alabaster. This means the border appears in our custom alabaster color, perfectly matching the text. Now let's change the text color to green and see how the border adapts dynamically. Now, as soon as we change text alabaster to text green 500, the border automatically updates to green, matching the new text color. We didn't have to modify the border color separately. Tailwind handled it for us with current color. Another significant update in Tailwind CSS 4 is how placeholder text is handled. In earlier versions, placeholder text had a fixed default color of gray 400, which worked well in many cases but wasn't dynamic. This meant that if your text color was something other than gray, you often had to manually adjust the placeholder color to ensure consistency. Now, with Tailwind CSS 4, placeholder text automatically inherits the current text color and applies a 50% opacity by default. This makes placeholder styling much more intuitive and eliminates the need to explicitly set placeholder opacity 50, unless you want to override it. Let's observe this behavior by creating an input field, but before that, let's define custom amber text color in our index.css file. So we need here text amber, and the color is going to be variable amber 500. Now let's go back to the app.jsx file and create an input field with type text. Then we need placeholder, enter your name, and also add here some classes. We need bg white, text lg, text amber, then border 2. Also let's add here padding 4, then make the input rounded. Then we need margin left 4 and outline 0. When this input field renders in the browser, the text inside the input field will appear in our custom amber color. The border color will also match the text color because borders now default to current color, meaning they automatically inherit the text color unless explicitly overridden. The placeholder text will also inherit the amber color, but with 50% opacity, making it look slightly faded, yet perfectly in sync with the rest of the field. Another significant change in Tailwind CSS 4 is content detection. In previous versions, we had to manually define the content array inside tailwind.config.js to specify which files Tailwind should scan for utility classes. This often requires constant updates, especially when working with larger projects or adding new file types. If a file was not included in the content array, Tailwind would not process its classes, which sometimes led to unexpected missing styles. Now in Tailwind CSS 4, content detection happens automatically, making the setup much cleaner, smarter, and more efficient. Tailwind scans your project and detects which files contain Tailwind utility classes without requiring manual configuration. It also respects git ignore by default, meaning ignored files won't be unnecessarily processed, keeping performance optimized. While automatic detection is a great improvement, there might be cases where you want to manually include files that are ignored by default. This is where the new source directive comes in. Instead of defining content sources inside a Tailwind config.js file, you can now declare them directly in your CSS, making the configuration more intuitive and CSS first. Here is an example. We can add @source, then node modules, followed by some third-party library. This tells Tailwind to explicitly scan all CSS files inside the some third-party library directory within node modules. This is particularly useful when you are using external UI component libraries or Tailwind-based third-party styles that are not automatically detected. Next, let's talk about the plugin directive, one of the most exciting features in Tailwind CSS 4. This update takes plugin integration to a new level, making it incredibly simple to extend Tailwind with third-party utilities like animations, typography enhancements, or even custom components. Before Tailwind 4, adding a plugin required modifying the Tailwind config.js file, which could sometimes feel a bit disconnected from the rest of the styling workflow. But now, with plugin directive, we can enable plugins directly in CSS, keeping everything in one place and making the process more intuitive. Let's see this in action by integrating the Tailwind CSS Animate plugin, which provides beautiful animation utilities. Before using it, we first need to install the package via npm. We need npm install Tailwind CSS Animate. This will add the plugin to our project dependencies. Now, instead of manually adding it inside a configuration file, we can now import and enable it directly in CSS using the plugin directive. For that, we need plugin Tailwind CSS Animate. So by adding this, Tailwind automatically detects and registers all the animation utilities provided by the Tailwind CSS Animate plugin, making them available for immediate use. Now that we have the plugin enabled, let's put it to use. Previously, we created a button, and now let's add to it Animate Pulse. As soon as the page loads, the button starts pulsating, fading in and out. This new approach saves time and keeps our project organized and efficient. Instead of juggling multiple configuration files and scattered plugin settings, we can manage everything in our CSS file. One of the standout features in Tailwind CSS 4 is the introduction of native container queries. This allows you to style elements based on the size of their parent container rather than the entire viewport. Previously, you needed the Tailwind CSS Container Queries plugin to use this functionality. Now it's built directly into Tailwind, making it simpler and more powerful. Now, what exactly are container queries? In previous versions of Tailwind, we primarily relied on media queries to make designs responsive. Media queries allow us to style elements based on the viewport size, but sometimes that's not enough. Imagine you're building reusable components inside a complex layout. You might want a card, sidebar, or section to adjust its styling based on the space available inside its parent container, rather than the overall viewport width. This is where container queries come into play. Container queries enable styles to be applied conditionally based on the size of the parent container, making them much more flexible for modern responsive design. Let's demonstrate this with a simple grid layout where the number of columns dynamically adjusts depending on the container size. So we need to create some JSX, add development with the classes add container, followed by border, and then padding 4. Then inside the development, I'm going to open another div with the classes grid columns 1. Then we need add sm, grid columns 2, and then add lg, grid columns 4, followed by gap 4. Then inside this grid container, I'm going to create 4 boxes. Let's open development with the classes bg, blue, 500, and then add height 40. Let's duplicate this line of code 3 times and then changes the background colors. Let's add here green, red, and yellow. So add container enables the outer div to act as a container for responsive behavior. Instead of relying on the viewport width, we can now apply styles based on this container's size. As we load this example in the browser, you will see a grid layout with 4 colored boxes. The grid starts with 4 columns because of the add lg grid columns 4 class applied when the container is large enough. This ensures the content is evenly distributed in a visually appealing layout. Now, let's start shrinking the browser window. As the container's width becomes smaller and crosses the breakpoint for lg, the layout dynamically adjusts to show only 2 columns. This is triggered by the sm grid columns 2 class, which applies when the container size matches the sm breakpoint. Finally, as we reduce the container width even further, it crosses the breakpoint for sm and the layout switches to a single column. This behavior is defined by the default grid columns 1 class, which ensures the content remains readable and accessible even in the smallest container sizes. Next, let's talk about the max variant. The max variant in Tailwind CSS 4 is a powerful addition that allows you to apply styles when the width of the parent container is below a specific breakpoint. Unlike traditional viewport-based media queries, which target the entire browser window, max focuses on the size of the container itself. This makes it perfect for building responsive, context-aware components that adapt to their immediate environment, rather than relying on the overall viewport size. Now, let's create a grid layout that changes to a single column when the container width is below a certain size. So let's modify the classes for the grid container. We need here grid columns 3, and then max md grid columns 1. As for the boxes, I'm going to get rid of one of them. So when you load this example in the browser, you will see 3 boxes in a row. This is because the grid columns 3 class sets the grid to 3 columns by default. Now, let's resize the browser window. As the container width shrinks and falls below the empty breakpoint, the layout adjusts to a single column grid. This behavior is controlled by the max md grid columns 1 class, which applies when the container's width is smaller than the md breakpoint. The grid now stacks the boxes vertically, one on top of the other, while preserving the spacing between them. Alright, next let's talk about the combination of min and max variants in Tailwind CSS 4. It allows you to define precise range-based styles for container queries. This means you can apply utilities only when the container's width falls within a specific range, offering unparalleled control over responsive designs. For example, using min, md, max xl enables you to target containers that are between the md and xl breakpoints, ensuring your styles apply only within that range. Now, let's create a flexbox layout that hides elements only when the container width is between the md and xl breakpoints. I'm going to leave the container as it is. Then we need flex container with gap 4. Then I'm going to define a width for each box. It's going to be 64. As for the second green box, I'm going to add here at min empty, at max XL hidden. When you load this example in the browser, you will see 3 square boxes, blue, green, and red, arranged in a horizontal row with equal spacing between them. This is because of the flex and gap for classes, which create a flexbox layout and maintain consistent spacing between the elements. As you start resizing the browser, the green box's visibility changes based on the width of the parent container. The min empty max XL hidden class ensures the green box is hidden only when the container's width is between the MD and XL breakpoints. Before the MD breakpoint, the green box remains visible alongside the blue and red boxes. Between MD and XL breakpoints, the green box disappears entirely, leaving just the blue and red boxes visible. After the XL breakpoint, the green box reappears and all 3 boxes are visible again. This behavior showcases the precision and flexibility of using range-based container query variants like min and max. Tailwind CSS 4 introduces an exciting addition to its utility classes, 3D Transform APIs. These utilities bring 3D transformations directly into your design workflow, allowing it to create visually stunning effects like rotations, scaling, and translations along the X, Y, and Z axis. Here are the new 3D Transform utilities introduced in Tailwind CSS 4. Rotate X and Rotate Y rotate elements around the X and Y axis. Scale Z scales elements along the Z axis, creating a depth effect. Next we have Translate Z, which moves elements closer or farther away along the Z axis. Also we have Perspective, which applies perspective to create realistic 3D effects. And Transform Style, which controls whether child elements are rendered flat or in 3D. First, let's consider a basic 3D rotation. Let's create a new example. I'm going to change the classes of the container development. We need min, age screen, then we need flexbox, item center, justify center, and the background is going to be gray 100. Inside the development, I'm going to create another div with the classes bg blue 500. Then we need height and width 96. We need again flexbox with item center, justify center. Then we need text white, text 4XL. Also, let's make font bold. And after that, I'm going to add here transform, rotate X 35 and rotate Y 35. As for the content, let's add here 3D rotate. So this example here adds a rotation effect to an element around the X and Y axis. The rotate X 35 and rotate Y 35 classes rotate the element 35 degrees around the X and Y axis, creating a tilted effect. The transform class is required to enable transforms. When you open this in the browser, you will see a blue box centered on the screen with the text 3D rotate displayed in bold, white, and large font. The box is rotated at an angle, creating a 3D effect. This rotation is caused by the rotate X 35 and the rotate Y 35 classes, which tilts the box 35 degrees along the x-axis and y-axis respectively. Now let's talk about 3D scaling. I'm going to create an element that scales when hovered. So I'm going to modify this code. Let's add perspective 1000 to the wrapper development. Then I'm going to modify the second development. I'm going to add here transform style 3D. Then instead of those rotate classes, I'm going to add hover scale 150. Then we need hover translate Z20 with transition transform and duration 300. As for the content, we need 3D scale. So here, perspective 1000 adds a perspective of 1000 pixels to the parent container. The z-axis scaling will become visible due to the perspective. Next we have hover scale 150. It scales the element by 150% along all axes, including z. Then we have hover translate z20. It moves the element 20 pixels closer to the viewer along the z-axis. Then we added transform style 3D. It ensures the element retains its 3D transformations. And then we have transition transform duration 300, which provides a smooth animation for scaling and translation on hover. When you open this in the browser, you will see a green box with the text 3D scale centered on the screen. Initially, the box is flat and positioned in 3D space thanks to the perspective 1000 applied to the parent container. When you hover over the box, it grows larger and appears to move closer to you, creating a dynamic 3D effect. Okay, so these 3D transform APIs allow you to create dynamic and immersive 3D effects. With features like perspective and transform style 3D, you can bring depth and realism to your designs, making interactions more engaging. Tailwind CSS 4 introduces an exciting update with its expanded gradient APIs, allowing for greater flexibility and creativity in designing visually dynamic components. Previously, Tailwind supported only basic linear gradients, limited to strict horizontal or vertical directions. While functional, this approach lacked customization, making it difficult to achieve more sophisticated gradient effects. With Tailwind 4, we now have the BG Linear utility, which enables precise control over gradient angles. One of the most useful additions is the ability to create angled linear gradients, which allow colors to blend diagonally or in any custom direction. In earlier versions, gradients were restricted to simple left to right or top to bottom transitions, but now with utilities like BG Linear 45, we can apply a gradient at a 45-degree angle, giving layouts a more dynamic and modern feel. Let me show you some examples. I'm going to modify this code. Let's get rid of perspective and then create new development here with the classes BG Linear 45 from blue 500 to green 500. Then add some padding equal to 8. Then we need rounded. Text is going to be 2XL. Also we need font bold and text white. As for the content, let's add here angled gradient. So in this example, BG Linear 45 applies a gradient at a 45-degree angle, making the transition smoothly diagonal instead of just left to right or top to bottom. From blue 500 to green 500 blends the gradient from blue to green along this angle. Beyond angled gradients, Tailwind 4 introduces two powerful new gradient types, conic gradients and radial gradients. A conic gradient rotates colors around a central point rather than transitioning from one side to another. This makes it perfect for circular and radial effects such as pie charts, spinning backgrounds, or decorative UI elements. On the other hand, radial gradients expand outward from a focal point, producing an effect similar to a glowing spotlight. Let's see in action how conic and radial gradients work in Tailwind. I'm going to replace this div element with another one, and I'm going to add here classes size 64, rounded full, then BG conic 180 from indigo 600 via indigo 50 to indigo 600. So in this example, size 64 ensures that the element has equal width and height, making it a perfect square before rounding it into a circle. BG conic 180 creates a conic gradient that starts at 180 degrees, meaning the gradient transitions in a half circle effect rather than the default full circle distribution. The next classes define the gradient's color stops. It starts with a deep indigo 600, then transitions through indigo 50, a much lighter shade, creating a contrast that adds depth to the gradient. Finally, it circles back to indigo 600, completing the loop and ensuring a smooth, symmetrical rotation effect. When viewed in the browser, this element displays a mesmerizing circular gradient that rotates smoothly around the center, creating an effect similar to a radial glow or a rotating pie chart. Now, let's move on to the radial gradient example. I'm going to add here another div with the classes bg radial from yellow 500 to red 500. Then I'm going to define width and height. Let's make both of them 64 and also add here rounded full. So here is what's happening. BG radial applies a radial gradient, meaning the colors will transition outward from the center rather than in a linear or rotational pattern. From yellow 500 to red 500 defines the gradient's transition. The gradient starts with yellow 500 at the center. It smoothly blends outward into red 500, creating a glowing spotlight-like effect. In the browser, this results in a soft, radiant effect that mimics a glowing sun, a spotlight, or even a heat map style visual. Unlike conic gradients, which focus on rotational transitions, radial gradients emphasize depth and center focus blending. Now, let's dive into some of the visually impactful features introduced in Tailwind CSS 4, the inset-shadow and inset-ring utilities. These utilities bring a new dimension to designing shadow and ring effects inside the boundaries of an element, offering sleek and modern design possibilities. To showcase their capabilities, I'm going to set up an example with 3 text input fields, each demonstrating one of these utilities. I'm going to open development with the classes minimum height screen. Then we need grid container, gap 4, place item center, and let's change the background, make it deep blue. Inside here, I'm going to open input element with the type text, then add here placeholder, enter your name, and then I'm going to add classes, inset-shadow sm, then we need inset-shadow amber 500, then I'm going to add here border 4, rounded sm. Also, I'm going to define width and height. The width is going to be 96. As for the height, I'm going to make it 18. Then we need padding 4, text excel. Then change the color of the text to make it amber. And finally, we need outline none. Let's duplicate input elements, and instead of border, let's insert here ring 4. And then I'm going to duplicate input field once again. Instead of insert shadows, I'm going to add here insert ring 4. And then insert ring amber 500. So the first input field uses the inset-shadow utility, which creates an inner shadow effect. Inset-shadow sm adds a subtle inner shadow inside the element. Inset-shadow amber 500 colors the shadow using the custom amber color. The input field has a soft amber colored inner shadow that gives it depth, while the border 4 defines a sharp outer boundary. The second input field demonstrates a combination of inset-shadow and an outer ring effect. Inset-shadow sm and inset-shadow amber 500 create a recessed inner shadow in the input field. Ring 4 adds a 4-pixel outer ring around the element, creating a glow-like effect. In this case, the input field has both an inner amber shadow and an outer glowing ring. The ring extends outside the border, adding a layered and visually appealing contrast. The final input field uses the inset-ring utility, which creates an inner ring effect similar to the ring class but applied inside the element. Inset-ring 4 adds a 4-pixel inner ring to the input field. Inset-ring amber 500 colors the ring with the custom amber shade. To remind you the distinction between borders and rings, borders are part of the element size, which means they add to the width and height of the input field and are positioned directly on its edges. Rings are external that do not affect the element's dimensions. Rings are often used for highlights or focus indicators, whereas borders define structure. If I add ring 4 to the third input, you will see clearly the outer and inner rings on the input field. So these new utilities in Tailwind CSS 4, inset-shadow and inset-ring, offer flexibility for adding depth and emphasis to your designs. Whether you're creating subtle shadows, glowing highlights, or inner effects, these features make it easier than ever to style your components. Now let's talk about one of the impactful updates in Tailwind CSS 4, the modernized P3 color palette. This update represents a significant improvement in how colors are handled in Tailwind, making them more vibrant and accurate than ever before. The modernized P3 color palette in Tailwind CSS 4 is a transformative update that brings more vibrancy and richness to web design. This palette moves from the traditional RGB or sRGB color spaces to OKLCH, a perceptual color space that directly aligns with how humans see and interact with colors. While RGB relies on fixed combinations of red, green, and blue light, OKLCH uses parameters like lightness, chroma, and hue, which offer a more natural and harmonious color representation. This shift not only enhances the visual appeal, but also simplifies workflows for developers. Tailwind's thoughtfully balanced palette ensures a seamless integration into projects without requiring additional customizations, making it a powerful tool for creating designs that are both modern and timeless. The last feature I want to talk about in Tailwind CSS 4 is the Not variant. This is a powerful addition that extends Tailwind's utility-based styling to scenarios where you want to explicitly exclude certain elements or conditions. It leverages the CSS not pseudoclass, making it easier to style elements that don't match a specific condition, such as a particular class, type, or state. To demonstrate how the not variant works, let's create a practical example. Imagine we want to style a list of items where all list items except for those with the class active should have a light gray background. I'm going to replace this code. Let's open development with the classes min height screen, flex, then we need item center, justify center, and background gray 100. Inside the development, I'm going to open UL with the classes space, y4, and text center. Inside the list, we will have 3 list items. Let's open the first one. We need here bg gray 200, p4, rounded, then text lg. And now I'm going to use not variant. We need not active, bg red 500, and the content is going to be item 1. Let's duplicate this line of code twice. I'm going to change the second list item. We need here active. Then I'm going to get rid of this not active from here. As for the content, let's add here item 2 active. As for the third list item, I'm going to change the content. It's going to be item 3. So in this example, we've used the not active bgred 500 class to style all list items that do not have the active class. This utility is particularly useful for managing exceptions in your styling logic, ensuring that specific elements stand out or behave differently based on their class. Here, the not active variant applies a vibrant red background to all items that are not marked as active, while the active item remains untouched and keeps its default light gray background. So, you can notice here how the not active variant makes the non-active items visually distinct. As a result, the active item becomes naturally emphasized without needing additional styling. This dynamic behavior creates a clear visual hierarchy, making it easier for users to identify the active state at a glance. So instead of writing complex selectors or additional conditional logic, The not variant allows you to achieve the desired result with minimal effort. And that wraps up our deep dive into Tailwind CSS version 4, from the fast performance of the new engine to powerful new features like CSS-based configuration, expanded gradient APIs, and modernized P3 color palette. This update truly redefines what's possible with utility-first CSS. We also explored new variants like not, container queries, and the innovative theme and utility directives. If you found this guide helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss out on our future tutorials, and stay up to date with everything happening in the tech world. Of course, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What's your favorite feature in Tailwind CSS 4? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.